Oh, there we go. And then we're gonna get started. So, my name is Branden Lowder. If you're not, familiar with me, I've been around for a minute. I actually got my license in, holy moly, 1993. So this is my 33rd year of real estate. I have a team here in the Keller Williams office. My wife and partner, her name is Tammy Baker. We run Echo Real Estate Partners. We primarily work in the investor space. So we primarily deal with real estate investors. So we've closed over 3,900 transactions in our life. So we've done a few deals, right? Which is kind of cool. So we're glad that you're here. I know you guys have been kind of going through the motions. We are, I think what's cool about Ignite lately is you get the opportunity to meet other instructors and other agents, and hopefully that experience has been good for you. So, this is a great quote. I like to think of sales as the ability to gracefully persuade, not manipulate a person or persons into a win-win situation. I am a very non-traditional real estate agent. So I want you to bear that in mind as you listen to me kind of talk through this with you guys. There's no real formal checklist. So if you're taking notes, I encourage you to take notes. I know we're recording this. So I'm probably going to throw some things in there that aren't necessarily in the Ignite materials for you. But if you can see that on the screen, this is the basic offer process. We got to get to a place where a buyer and yourself hopefully have agreed to make an offer on a property that is available for sale, right? That's what we're talking about. So in the context of what we do, sometimes we take responsibility for our clients. So literally what it says there is the buyer is making an offer, and that is true. The buyer is definitely making an offer. You're just representing the buyer and presenting the offer to the listing agent. And then the listing agent's responsibility is to get that offer to the seller. So that's kind of what we're talking about. You guys are the facilitator of this. And both the buyer and the seller and the listing agent or the buyer's agent are all relying on you to effectively be able to communicate. So just like that quote that was on the screen, it's important to understand it's not just the submitting of the offer, it's how you present that that can make or break a deal, believe it or not. So once that has been established that you have submitted the offer, one of three things typically happens. The buyer is going to counter offer the terms and conditions. They might not like a few things that we're going to get into the semantics there shortly, but they have the ability to counter that, and then that reopens negotiations, and it could go back and forth several times until you get to a place where there's an acceptance. The second thing that can happen is they can just accept it outright, and that's even more amazing because if you can write such a clean offer that the seller just accepts it right out of the gate, that's pretty amazing. So in all the years I've been doing this, all the transactions that I've ever written, it's very rare these days that you get to a place where you write an offer that's so clean and presented so well that the seller accepts it. Now, here's a caveat to that. I'm very big on collaborating, which means if I was representing the buyer, I'm going to try and gather as much important information from the listing agent about the seller to try and write a very clean offer. So if you get that opportunity to do that, that's a great thing. And then the third is they just flat out didn't like the offer and they didn't even want to counter offer you, and they rejected it. So sometimes you'll hear it or you'll see it in a text or an email where they say the seller has rejected your offer. They should be giving you something formal in writing to actually, so that you can go back to the buyer and prove to the buyer that the seller actually rejected it. So make a note that if you represent a buyer and the seller and the listing agent are telling you that they are not accepting your offer, make a note that you want that in writing. Because there are, unfortunately, sometimes there are listing agents out there who actually don't even present your offer. So you want proof that at least your offer was submitted to the seller. So those are the three primary functions of the roadmap. Once you guys make an offer with your buyers, I'm not going to get into ahas because I don't think we're quite ready for ahas, but this is where I want to spend some time with you. And that is, what does it take to get to this place where we want to write an offer? In today's world, we have access to information, and we have these tools, and your buyer, as an example, has a Zillow app or a Redfin app or whatever it is that they're using. And most of us probably have ordered something off of Amazon. And if you order something off of Amazon, you probably get to that place where you're also, heck, I can't wait for everything. So I got to hit Prime, right? I need it now. So because of that, we have a tendency in our society to be a little bit anxious about things. And if you have read the contract, like I hope you have, there's a lot of pages and there's a lot of boilerplate to a contract, right? So the reason I'm bringing that up is I feel your value is better served when you actually understand the paperwork you're asking somebody to sign. So make sure that you're kind of on the same page with me there. So here's something I would recommend. I would recommend that you print out a contract and highlight the key areas of the contract that are going to be important for you to be able to fill out, that you're going to need information. Like, that's your first cheat sheet. So if you just print out the contract and you just start reading and highlighting all of the areas where you're going to need information, that's going to help us be better prepared to write the offer, just so you know. And what does that mean? Sometimes I've heard agents have great conversations with a buyer and they're all excited. They want to write an offer on Main Street. And the general conversation is like this. Okay, Branden, I want to write that offer. I really want the house. What do you think we should do? And you're like, well, you tell me the price, and they tell you the price. You say, okay, great. I will get the contract over to you. When the reality is you only have the price. You don't have their name, how they legally spell their name. You don't have all of the pieces of information that you're going to need to get. And what ends up happening is you don't look very professional because you're constantly reaching back out to them to ask them for information. So don't be that agent. Print out the contract, read it, and highlight all of these areas. We're going to talk about it along the way that are going to be important for you as information gathering to get the contract written in the first place, right? So just think in those terms for now. Secondly, again, it can be a very competitive space sometimes here. Yeah, I just really struggle with this whole thing. Go away. Sorry about that, you guys. Sometimes in the MLS, let's just say I'm helping David find a property and we go through the open house. There's a high probability that the listing agent might not be doing the open house. It's another agent. So they might not be as informed about the property's availability, as an example. So you have to be able to confirm that the property is available, regardless of whether it says active in the MLS. So the right thing to do is to try and contact the listing agent and just say, I have a buyer, or I have somebody potentially going to be submitting an offer. I just want to know, don't say, is it available? Because if it were me and it was still active, I would say, well, it's active on it. I would be a little sarcastic. So just say, are you and the seller still accepting offers? That's how I would present it. So making sure that the property is still available by asking that question. Building rapport with the listing agent is just like anything else. If they're a collaborative agent, they're going to talk with you, which is great. If they're a competitive agent, they're probably going to give you one-word answers if they even respond to you at all. Sometimes they don't want to talk on the phone, so you're going to have to learn how to just be a little bit creative with getting to this place where you're trying to gather information, right? So you not only need information to fill out the contract from the buyer, but you should be doing some intelligence gathering from the listing agent, about the seller, what's important to them, all of that good stuff right before we craft our offer, because sometimes your buyer's gonna ask you for advice. What do you think we should do? How do you think we should respond to it, right? And we'll get into that here in a second. So if you got the opportunity to build rapport, that is an amazing thing. Number 3 says inquire about activity. I think that's a good thing. What I mean by that, like, so if the property just went on the market today, because of the market that we've been in, the newness of a property hitting the market has a lot of activity typically. There are people that are interested, their notifications are, chiming in from Redfin and Zillow, right? So there's usually the first 5 to 7 days, there's more activity than if the property's been on the market for 30 days. So what we're trying to talk about in number 3 is understanding where the property is on days on market, because brand new listed is completely different than 30 or 45 days on market, right? So if it's brand new on the market, that question sounds literally like number 3 is outlined there. All you got to do is say, what's your activity been like? So don't overthink it, because you're just trying to get a gauge of interest. The challenge, though, at the end of the day, is you're in a competitive space here in LA. And not everybody's going to be honest with you. They might bluff you. They might say, oh my God, my phone won't stop ringing. When in reality, maybe nobody's calling, but you don't necessarily know, right? What we're trying to do is size up the information by asking good questions along the way. Do they have any additional offers? Right, is another great question. Sometimes it's presented in a way that they're going to accept, or they're going to review offers a few days down the road. Make a note of this, please. Make sure you are reading the agent private remarks in the MLS before you make the phone call, because a good or a more experienced listing agent in the private agent remarks will typically leave good instructions on when and how they're looking at offers, how they want their offers submitted. Sometimes they'll even point out important things to the seller, like the seller can't close before April 30th. So if they're saying the seller can't close before April 30th, are you going to write an all cash offer that can close in 10 days? That's right. That's an example of paying attention, right, to what you're reading and what you're hearing from the listing agent. Some listing agents like to talk on the phone, some will only email you, some will only speak via text. So you just have to size the situation up a little bit, right? If the property, now in the MLS, you should all know that if I'm looking at a property profile, on the right-hand side in the top right corner, it has the days on market. There's 2 of them. There's a days on market and a calendar days on market. If you click the calendar days on market and open it up, it's going to tell you the history of that listing. Maybe they had a price reduction, maybe they had a price increase, maybe it was under contract or pending and it came back on the market. And that's kind of what we're talking about there in number 4, right? So it's about, have you received any other offers? Did you accept any other offers? Why did it come back on the market? Why did it fall out? This is part of the information gathering that's important before you write and submit your offer. Number 5 is seller motivation. David, go ahead.
Sorry, about the activity. So let's say I click on the days on market.
Yep.
And you see all the history. Would you, let's say it's a relisting that you took, but you weren't the first agent.
Okay.
Would you see the history from that time? Oh, you would too. Okay.
Yeah. Anytime a property's been in the MLS, that calendar days on market will show you. Even if they bought it 7 years ago for $400,000 less,
show you that.
it should show you that's there. So remember, your information gathering should be for the benefit of you and the buyer. So you sometimes you want the information, but you don't necessarily want to tell everybody you have the information either, right? It's like playing poker to a certain degree. You might not want to show your hand, but there's nothing wrong with asking, right? Number 5, asking about seller motivations and their needs. I would change that. I would personally gear all of your questions around help me understand what's important to the seller. Like, don't worry about the word motivation, because I'm gonna get to that in a second. So the priority should be what's important to the seller. Is it when do they close? Is it, they need time after it closes, they need a few days to pack up and move? Like, all of those things are examples of what information is the listing agent willing to give me that's important to the seller, so that I'm crafting my offer accordingly, right? That would be an example. Motivation, I would never ask, is the seller motivated? I would never ask, what's motivating the seller? Like, to me, that's just a overused cheeseball script. What I would ask to find out motivation is, does the seller know where they're moving next? That's how I would ask the same question. And here's what I mean by that. If the seller doesn't even know where they're moving, they're not as motivated as the seller who just put a down payment on their next house. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Or they have a contingency.
Maybe they have a contingency, right? So the idea of how we craft our words and our questions sometimes is a little bit important, and I want to, be a little bit strategic about that. Number 6, how do they want to receive an offer, right? Number 6 is just as critical, because this is the communication part. For those of you who've taken classes from me in the past, I'm very big on ending every conversation when I meet somebody for the first time. David, it was nice talking to you. Looking forward to, future communications. Would you prefer a text, an email, or a phone call? I end it the same way every time, and I would require or recommend that you do the same, right, with the other agents that you're potentially going to be talking to. Just, hey, before I get off the phone, or just, hey, before I leave, what's the best way for me to communicate with you? Just ask that question, because if they tell you I like texting, what does that mean? Don't call them, right? Because it's going to get annoying to them to a certain degree, right? So in addition to that, what's the best way for me to send you the offer, right? And they'll typically say something, please just send it to my email. This is my email address, or you can read the private agent remarks with the instructions on how to submit the offer. Now, every once in a while, if you're actually noticing, and it might take you a minute, not every listing agent does this, but there is a way for a listing agent in the MLS to actually attach, they're called supplements. So there's actually a link at the top of the property profile. So if they have other pieces of paperwork that are important, like offer instructions, that'll be an attachment. It's called a supplement in the MLS. But usually they'll make that comment in the private remarks. Please see the attached supplement. Sometimes they already have the disclosures done. Sometimes they have estimates for repairs. Sometimes they have information that would be important for you and the buyer to be aware of before you make the offer. So make sure you're also, again, reading the instructions from the listing agent, or you're at least asking that question. Number 7 is important both ways. So right now, about 25 to 30% of all real estate transactions are cash. So a cash offer is one way, right? And a cash offer, typically you want a proof of funds, and that's typically in the form of a bank statement that the buyer is going to provide you. Or what number 7 is also saying is, if your buyer is getting a loan, you need to make sure that your buyer is approved already with a lender. It's kind of the standard of practice for real estate agents today. So if I was a listing agent and you had a buyer that was genuinely interested in writing an offer, and you submitted an offer and they haven't even been qualified yet, there's a high probability that I'm not going to present your offer to the seller, because you can't prove to me that they can perform. Is kind of how we look at it, right? There's also a qualifier for you working with buyers. Do you want to go show property and help people find real estate who haven't been pre-approved? That's up to you to decide whether you want to do that or not. You can, I call it practice. You probably need practice, so there's nothing wrong with that. Just be prepared, right? That your buyer needs to be able to perform. And it's a combination of the two things. And it doesn't say it on here, so please make that note on number 7. You're not just wanting a pre-approval letter or a pre-qualification letter. You still should be asking for a proof of funds from your buyer, even if they're getting a loan. So I want to make sure they have the funds available for the down payment and the closing costs too. So that's just a rule of thumb, standard of practice, that I would recommend on there. Number 8, kind of giving you little nuggets. You want to review the MLS and the tax records. Go ahead, Dave.
Bank statement, like the last 2 months is the standard or just?
No, so really what I want from approved funds is that you can give me page 1 of your bank statement. It could be a couple different bank statements. It could be from your, wherever the proceeds are coming from the down payment, that account. It could be a retirement account, it could be a
But
stock.
would it be like just 1 month or 2 months, like what's the?
Just 1 month.
Just 1 month.
Yeah, so we're not really trying to qualify them. We're just wanting their most recent bank statement to show that their balance, available balance is greater than what their down payment and stuff is gonna be. Now, most likely, the lender who's pre-approved them also has a copy of all of that stuff too, because they're not gonna give you a pre-approval letter unless they can prove that they have the ability to perform on that side of it as well. Yes, sir.
What is it, when you call a vendor, what should you be prepared to tell them? Just the whole ideal, like the whole pre-qualification, get down like, hey, I have this, like, for example, this morning, I have this friend of mine, but his mom, I mean, his dad is looking to buy, but his dad's wife is the person with the money. She told me she has a bank account ready with, I think she said over 100,000 saved in there.
Okay.
She said she's building her credit, and while she's building her credit to get better because she doesn't want the biggest down payment, she's doing the homeowners classes.
Yep.
She's doing what's that one loan called? HEPA?
Well, there's a HIPAA loan.
Yeah,
There's-
that.
Well, no, HIPAA is insurance.
It's
You mean it's a NACA?
NACA, there you go,
Oh, she's
NACA.
doing.
Yeah, she's doing NACA, she's doing NACA classes,
Yeah.
and then she said right now she wants somewhere to live, so she wants to rent somewhere, and she wants to eventually buy,
Who's your mentor?
Vanessa,
Vanessa. So those are good questions for her,
yeah.
because I don't wanna tell you something different than what she's kind of doing, but for the most part, if she's already trying to
This
get,
is the lender.
we'll go take it. Yeah, I'll take the call. Yeah, I think the best thing to do is always lean on the lender for advice when it comes to those things.
Well, and NACA, just as enough PSI, I actually just took a training with NACA this morning. NACA uses their own, like they use Bank of America.
Yep.
They use their own lender,
Yeah,
so.
Bank of America has their own NACA program, right?
And yeah, so, but they were telling us is like, you can take them to whatever lender, but that lender don't matter if they're gonna go through NACA because they gotta go through their own.
Yeah, I think any borrower should shop
Mhm.
and explore options, right? So we have great
Yeah,
lenders
yeah,
here.
exactly.
And
No, I'm just saying, like,
Yeah, yeah,
if the
totally.
goal is NACA,
yeah,
like, you can't use any other
No,
lender.
no, right, exactly. Number
Can I
8,
ask a question?
yes.
If I have like a buyer and I know his investor, like somebody like you, so I have to ask him to do the pre-qualify, or I can do offer since I know he can be qualified for that.
I would have the conversation with the investor that you're probably not better off. You should probably have some pre-approval letter before you write and submit any offer.
Mhm.
So I don't necessarily want to tell you how you should have the conversation. How I would have the conversation with our investors would be, listen, most sellers and listing agents aren't going to accept any offer without a pre-approval letter. So which lender do you want to talk to? So
Okay.
I would make sure that, I hear what you're saying. It's not that they have a fear of qualifying. The point is if you submitted that offer to me and they weren't pre-approved, I wouldn't even present it to the seller. So knowing that, that's the conversation I would have with the buyer. I would say, listen, most sellers and most listing agents aren't even going to accept an offer regardless without some type of pre-approval letter and proof of funds.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, makes sense. Thank you.
And that's, believe it or not, that conversation is your qualifier,
Mhm.
right? Because investors in particular, they don't have a problem wasting other agents' time for free. So if they're not even willing to get a pre-approval letter, then there's a high probability they're not really wanting to buy a property.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
And piggyback off of that, so. I'm the buyer agent, you're the listing agent, so you get my offer from my client, but there's no pre-approval, you wouldn't even show it. Would you, you know how like you said, get it in writing? So let's
So
say,
David, I got your offer. I appreciate it. Looks like they're getting a loan. I didn't see a pre-approval letter.
and I would say we
And
don't,
you're.
we don't have one yet. We
Yeah,
have-
but I'm saying, I appreciate that. Let me know when you get it.
Okay,
I'm
well,
not,
can I get that in writing, like, if I wouldn't, like, they wouldn't do that?
who?
Like that buyer agent, just because you had told us like,
Yeah.
get a rejection in writing.
Yeah, so as a buyer's agent, what I would recommend all of you do is that you say to your clients, I'm not writing and presenting any offer without.
Yeah,
That's my standard of practice.
okay,
It doesn't mean that I don't love you, it doesn't mean that I don't trust you, it doesn't mean that I don't know that you have. I'm just simply saying there isn't a seller in the world that's gonna accept it anyway. Or you can put the shoe on the other foot and say, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, if you were the seller, would you take an offer that they had no proof they could perform? And they're gonna go, no, and you're gonna go, okay, well, here we are, right? So, it's an important part of
Yeah.
the transaction. Because what we want to do is we want to demonstrate to the seller, we have the ability to perform and get across the finish
not
line.
just waste your time.
Yep, exactly. Back to number 8. So in the MLS, right, you obviously are gathering information. The asking price, calendar days on market, have there been any price reductions, like you're gathering all of that. You also, while you're in the property, profile, you can click the APN number. And that's right underneath the calendar days on market, and that's a link to the tax record for that property. So the reason we're encouraging you to click on the tax record is because you want to know who the seller is. You want to know, is it in a personal name? Is it in the name of a trust? Is it in the name of an entity? You can also gather information about the property there. I'll give you a quick example. So in the MLS, I have it listed. And it says 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, 1,362 square feet. But the tax record says 2 bedroom, 1 bath, 984 square feet. That's an example of, okay, there's a disconnect. So what does that mean? Well, sometimes, if you go back to the MLS and you read it, maybe it was a remodel or an addition, right? And it just hasn't caught up with the tax record. So you just want to make sure, right, that you understand any appraiser, as an example, they're gonna go off the tax record information and not necessarily the MLS. Because you can kind of cheat in the MLS, right? So that could be a potential red flag, right? So you just wanna make sure things are matching, and if they don't match, that goes back to your questions to the listing agent. Hey, I noticed in the tax record, it says a 2 bedroom, 1 bath, 860 square feet, but you have a 4 bedroom, 2 bath, 1,300 square feet in the MLS. What does that mean? And they'll tell you, well, they got a permit, they did an addition and and that's great information to have. That door, right, there you go. So, you wanna look at that, and then towards the bottom of the tax record, it'll show sale history. When did they buy it? How long have they owned it? Maybe it's been in the family for a while, maybe they got married once and divorced, and married again and divorced, and married again, whatever. And it'll also tell you some mortgage history. So that kind of information gathering can be helpful, believe it or not, when you're talking with your buyer about how we want to craft our offer, right?
And so let's say, we check the tax records. And it doesn't match, you speak to the agent and they said, oh, they added a room, but there's no permits or anything.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So they did work on the property without permits. Well, that's not gonna help the appraiser, unfortunately. So that's a red flag, and that's where a lot of property owners and even flippers make mistakes at the end of the day. Some appraisal types, it'll work, like 20% down conventional, they might not care. But you know, VA, FHA, those types of loans, are actually gonna care about that.
Okay.
So they're not gonna give it value. They're not gonna care that the structure is there and permitted. They're just not gonna give it any value for appraisal purposes.
But a conventional 20% might be okay.
Yeah, because
Okay.
the lender's like, okay, you're putting 20% down. I don't really care, you know? Cause it'll, you know, it'll still affect the appraisal, but the loan amount will still be lower, most likely than what the, you know, appraisal is gonna be. And that's what the lenders.
Because you're putting 20% down.
Yep,
That
yeah,
makes
got a little
sense.
more skin in the game for sure. So let me.
So it's kind of like you're paying the difference type of thing.
It could be. Yeah, it could be, yeah. And the other word or terminology would be gap. Appraisal gap is what it's called in the negotiations. Mhm. Number 9, believe it or not. Doesn't happen very often when you're representing a buyer. Now, again, your standard of practice should be, in the same context of this conversation, David, your standard of practice should be, hey, my client's just fell in love with his home. I should probably run comps to make sure that that listing agent priced it accordingly as well. Because I want to be able to make sure I'm not going under contract, maybe on an overpriced property. So number 9 can go a long way in you developing your skills as a real estate agent. And unfortunately, not a lot of buyers agents actually take that step. They just take it for face value that that's the price, it's not gonna have any problems, and the listing agent knows what they're doing. And I can tell you from experience, that's not always true, right? So running a CMA can go a long way. Number 10 is probably the most difficult thing to get from most listing agents today. Because most listing agents don't have any paperwork prepped when they list a property for sale. But if they do, typically that listing agent is making that comment in the agent private remarks. Seller has completed all this paperwork, please see attached supplements or email me for copies. That would be an example, right? Why is that important? Well, when your buyer is interested in a property, one of the next steps for them when you go under contract is to do inspections. So that's called buyer discovery. But the seller also has to provide paperwork, and disclosures are one of them. And there are some very good agents out there who have that done already when they list the property. So again, it's just a question that you should be asking and being a little bit prepared with.
So you always, as a buyer agent, you always ask for the seller's disclosure statement.
I do it because I just get a chuckle out of the fact that nobody's done it. So for me, like I've been doing, I know the game. And so what I find interesting is the listing agent wants you to get everything done as quickly as possible. They want you to get your appraisal done quickly, your inspection, they put all the pressure on the buyer. And then what I find interesting is that they don't have anything from the seller. And then when you go to ask for it, it's like pulling teeth. So yeah, if they've done it, great, but most of the time they haven't. All right, any ahas from that?
The MLS, the tax, the matching, all that knowledge, yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah, the information gathering is an important step, and that, you know, it goes back to my Amazon thing. It's you know, not everything is so surface. And what I mean by a competitive market, if it's the only house for sale and there's a lot of people interested in it, you know, people are anxious to miss steps.
Because they want to get to it.
They just want the house, and they don't want to look at all the paperwork, and they don't. But our job is to not get sued.
Mhm.
So the way I put it is, I want a buyer and seller to not have any regrets. And for me, that means being transparent and helping them discover everything that they possibly can, or uncover everything so that they actually know what it is that they're buying. This would be like you showing up, you go to buy a new car, you go to the car lot, and you're just like, listen, I've bought cars my whole life. I see this great car here. I see the sticker and I just want to negotiate on it. You negotiate on the car, you sign all the paperwork, and then you go to start it up and it doesn't start up. There's no engine in the car.
Mhm.
Well, what do you do?
Yeah, so-
And that, so for me, like, you see the house, but there's more to the house than just the cosmetic stuff. There's structural items, and there's a sewer, and there's a chimney, and there's all these things. You don't want your buyer calling you 2 days after they close that something's broken or not, right? So all of the information we can gather, the better. All right, anybody on Zoom have any comments?
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, let's get into writing an offer. So back to the recommendation is if you just print out a purchase agreement and you pretend that you have to fill it out, what are you missing? Oops. That's the beauty of this recommendation is you're gonna get to that place. Come on, go away. Oh, goodness gracious, this is the most obnoxious thing. Okay, it's working, but it's just. Apologies, you guys, this is not how I. I don't know why, there it goes, all right. It's your roadmap to asking the buyer the right questions. And making sure that you've got the right information from them to get to this place where you're completing the offer easily as possible. The other reason this is really important is it's very rare these days that we have a printed out offer that we're getting wet signatures and initials on. We typically do everything through zip forms, which is either DocuSign or digital ink or all of those stuff. And so I could just tell you how frustrating it can be for a buyer's agent to send that via email to your buyer, for them to click through an initial and there's things that are missed. You just don't want them calling you going, hey, I'm looking at this, you're asking me to sign something and that's not what we agreed to. You didn't tell me about this, what does this mean? And that just makes your relationship with the buyer that much more difficult. So you need to have it printed out until you know it like the back of your hand, and that's your checklist. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, this is as easy it is. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I'm excited that you want to write and submit an offer. Thank you for the opportunity. I just want you to know there's quite a few fields in the offer where we have to answer questions or fill in the blanks. So before I do that, here's the list of questions, and it starts with price. What is the price that you want to offer? And again, this is all part of the negotiation. You can't necessarily get butthurt because it's listed for $1 million and they want to write an offer for $920. Like you have to go to bat for your client, right? So what is the price? It's typically the most important thing. Believe it or not, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's not on this list that if you want to take notes, it's what name do they want the right to offer in? Right, we used to call this, how do you want to take title, but we don't do that anymore. So what name? Well, if his name's Bob Smith, could his name be Robert and not Bob? So the right way to ask these questions is, how would you legally like me to spell your name on the contract?
So does it have to match their ID or anything?
It doesn't necessarily have to match their ID, but that's gonna draw a flag, right? It's how do you legally take title? How do you want to legally write this? Because it does at some point need to match, or they're gonna have to answer the question. So the cleaner you can get their name, proper spelling, middle initial, if not a middle name, and a last name, and a junior or the third, whatever it is, the better. But what else is important about that and the name is, what if they want to put it in the name of a trust? What can you write an offer? Here's a trick question for you guys. Can you write an offer for a buyer on the property that they want to move into and own and the name of a trust? I want to put it in my trust. So can I write the offer in the name of my trust?
I would
You
say.
can, but you're gonna have to make changes to it if they're getting a loan. Because the trust is not qualifying for the loan. It's whoever the borrowers are. So there's some tricky things here just around name, and I could teach an hour-long class on all this, and I don't wanna trip you out. But if it is the trust, as an example, or the name of an entity, LLC, C corporation, any of those things, in addition to the pre-approval letter, what do you think you need? you need copy of the corporations or you need copy of the docs that proves they have authorization to sign on behalf of the name of that entity.
Do we
So-
get their do we get their IDs at some point? Like,
No, you don't have to get their ID.
how do you confirm that the person who's signing, for example, even at the very beginning, when you're getting the listing agreement, how do you know that the person signing the listing agreement is the person on the title and they're matching and they're not claiming to be somebody else?
So there's two things here. So if I'm talking to a seller about getting a listing, I have also printed out the tax record. And the tax record is going to show you who owns the property. And that's how you're going to identify that the person who's signing is signing. Now, if you feel for some reason that the person is not being honest with you and you're at that place where you want proof of ID, that can be a little tricky. But the tax record, if it's a seller, is pretty easy because if I'm filling out the listing agreement, I want it to match the tax record. If the seller has a trust, I want the listing agreement to match the name of the trust. But in addition to that, I need the trust paperwork to show that whoever has authorization to sign on behalf of the trust is the same person signing the listing agreement. Did that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Same with an LLC. If the owner is an LLC, I want proof of the operating docs to show that that person has authorization to sign on behalf of that LLC. On the buy side, I just want you to understand that if it's Mr. or Mrs. Smith, it's how do you legally spell your name? Because that's how, right? When you open up escrow, that's what they're going to do. Then escrow and the lender are going to ID them. You don't necessarily need to ID them.
But we have to make sure it matches whatever pre-approval.
It's not even that it's matching as much as I want you to understand when you're writing an offer, there's certain paperwork that needs to be included. So if you submitted an offer to me as a listing agent and it was in the name of an LLC, I want proof that the LLC exists and I want proof that whoever signed the offer has authorization to sign on it. And then in addition to that, the pre-approval letter needs to match the name of the LLC, right? So that's part of the puzzle, right? And so if I'm going to be a good buyer's agent, I want that information before I present it. Because if I'm the list, you guys are presenting me with half-assed stuff and bits of, like, I can't take you very seriously, right? Go ahead. You're going to ask a question on Zoom?
I have a question. If the seller has a trust, they need any one of the people in the trust to sign in, or it doesn't matter?
The reason you want a copy of the trust is the trust is going to spell out who needs to approve anything on the behalf of the trust. So let's say it's a trust and there's 5 kids.
Okay.
If the trust says that Camellia is authorized to sign on behalf of the trust, then we don't need the other 4 kids' signatures. But if the trust says it needs approval from all of the trustees, that's
Okay.
5 signatures.
Yes. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And that's again, right, that's why it's so important to understand who your buyer, who the seller are, so that you're looking for the right paperwork. Because you don't want to get in a situation where you're missing something, or to, I think it was Amir's point, that you're asking somebody to sign something that doesn't have the authority to sign, right? You don't want to do that. It's the same thing, guys, and I'll just tell you another quick nugget. You're going to meet people who are partners or couples. They may legally be married, they may not be legally married. And maybe one of them is part of the decision making, but they're not owners. They're not part of the equation. I've seen this happen, right? So if John Smith is the only one on title, he's the only one signing the listing agreement, not his wife Mary. If she ain't on title, she's not signing anything. Same thing with the buyer. So if John and Mary are married, so they would want you to write the offer in their name, but John's the only one qualified, you can't put Mary's name on the contract. And so these are the little things that you just kind of need to understand, and this is where your lenders and stuff can help you, right? Number two, again, I'll just repeat it, it's very rare that a listing agent has the seller disclosures ready for you before you're writing an offer, so don't sweat that too much. Conveyances, we don't deal with too much of that here in California.
What is
The
that?
terminology that we use here in California is a preliminary title report. And in the preliminary title report, it'll talk about the legal names of who's on title, more importantly, if they have copies of the trust documents, more importantly, any additional liens or anything on the property. Conveyances can also mean here anything that on title has to do with property lines, shared driveways, all that good stuff.
Easements, yeah.
Yeah, easements, all that good stuff. Earnest money is a big thing. And I don't want to turn this into a contract class, but you need to know what earnest deposit you're going to write in the offer. The rule of thumb is 3% of the purchase price, right? So if it's $1 million offer, it's a $30,000 deposit. Usually the offer has the instructions spelled out. It's typically a wire transfer. So you're just making sure that you're filling that in. The due diligence and inspection period. Again, for most people, the common things are how quickly does the deposit need to be in? How many days for any inspections? How many days for appraisal? How many days for loan approval? Those are kind of the main priority things when it comes to due diligence and inspection periods. And this is just a conversation, hopefully not with just the buyer about what makes sense to them, but hopefully the listing agent's providing you good information on what makes sense too, right? I'll give you an example. Today's Tuesday, and you're having some decent conversations with the listing agent, you represent the buyer. And today the conversation is, can you get your inspections done in 3 days? Maybe you can. You don't know that for sure. Before you answer that question, I would definitely call a home inspection company and go, how quickly can you get to this property? Because if they can't get to it till next Monday, you don't want to write an offer for 3 days inspections, right? You also have to be careful about the timing and the days of the week, right? So in other words, if it's Friday and you got 3 days and it's a holiday weekend and the inspector can't get there, like you have to make sure, right? Again, everything kind of is in alignment with how you're writing the offer. And it's a little tough when you're a newer agent at the beginning because if the listing agent is guiding you and the buyer's guiding you, you want to do the best that you can. I'm just telling you, sometimes being a yes man is not always the best thing. It's okay to challenge things and say, okay, I know you wanted to get it done in 3 days. I get it, but let me call and make sure the inspection company is available. And it might not just be the inspection company. Maybe you're doing sewer and chimney and termite. It's coordinating all of those people first before you write it. Maybe you need 5 days and not 3 days, right? It's just important. Time for seller acceptance. So your contract has a standard default of 72 hours. So after you submit and present an offer, typically the automatic by default expiration is 72 hours. So if you leave it blank, it expires in 3 days. Otherwise, you put a date and time in there that might be important. So today's Tuesday, you're going to write the offer, right? And if you leave it blank, it expires on Friday. But you just found out that the seller's on a cruise for the next 7 days. You might not want to leave it blank. You might want to give them 7 days from today as an expiration date. That's what time for seller acceptance means. Financing terms is very important. This is where you need to really coordinate both 7 and 8 together with the lender. What are the terms that the lender needs you to write in the contract? And it's as simple as that. Mr. and Mrs. Lender, I'm getting ready to write an offer for John Smith. What are the terms you want me to put in the contract? They want to write an offer for $1 million. They're going to tell you the loan amount. They're going to tell you the down payment. They're going to tell you how much time they need for appraisal. They're going to tell you how much time to get loan approval. Those are the things that you want to coordinate. Because once you go under contract, it's hard to change the terms without the seller's permission. So you just need to make sure, again, everything's buttoned up. Closing date, we talked a little bit about that earlier. It's very common for buyers, as an example, to want to close in 30 days, and sellers want you to close for 30 days, it's just been a rule of thumb. But maybe the lender says they need 45 days. If the lender says they need 45 days, that's a red flag to me. Why do they need 45 days? Most lenders can get stuff done in 21 to 30 days pretty easily if the buyer has their act together. So if the lender's telling me they want 45 days, it's telling me one of two things. Either the buyer doesn't have their act together or the lender doesn't have their act together. So that could be a red flag for me. So all of that is extremely important. Home warranty. I don't know where you guys are in the contract learning experience with Simon. But we as agents, whether we represent the buyer or the seller, that's typically a closing gift for us. We're not closing any property without a home warranty, period, end of story. It is the best liability as an agent you can have, regardless of who pays for it. So we just do it, that's standard of practice for us. If you can get the seller to pay for it because you're representing the buyer, God bless your little heart. If you're the listing agent, you get the buyer to pay for it, whatever, it's a negotiation. The point is, try not to ever close any real estate transaction without a home warranty. That's my story. Number 11, repair limits, understanding, if you represent the buyer, what that means is, what is your buyer willing to tolerate? Maybe he's a handyman or she's a handy person and they can do certain things and they're okay with that, right? It's understanding what makes sense for them and what doesn't make sense for them. You know, if the property needs a roof, maybe that's something they don't want to personally do themselves, meaning they're not roofers. So how are we negotiating repairs? Are we asking the seller to do it? Is it a requirement for the lender? All of those things you'll figure out once you get through inspections. But understanding that people have limits is an important thing. Special clauses. A lot of those are in your contract already. An example of a special clause would be a city report. So what does that mean? Well, there are certain cities and municipalities, Los Angeles included, where you can't close a transaction unless there's been a city inspection on the property. So they're looking for things like low flush toilets, low flow shower heads, gas emergency shutoff valve, quake relief valves, all sorts of things that typically have to happen in order for a property to close. So those would be examples of special clauses. And then any addenda, which would be additional terms or things when writing an offer.
So for the special clause, let's say you would put something like contingent on city inspection or.
Well, so that would be something that's kind of already baked into the contract.
okay.
So that an example of a special clause would be the buyer's doing a 1031 exchange and the seller's aware that the buyer's doing a 1031 exchange. That would be another special clause, but you're not going to see that too frequently in a real estate transaction. So the purchase agreement has come a long way with a majority of the things that happen.
Already in there.
And that's why I'm like, own it, understand that contract, because that's going to be your best gauge of what is it that I need to be asking my buyer and the lender and everybody for, so that I'm prepared when we go under contract. Yep. So any questions on that?
Yeah, when we do the additional terms, who do we go to write them? Like, how does, so let's say the buyer wants specific things, how do you write them?
So that probably wouldn't be a special clause, that would be in the addenda. So the purchase contract has limitations on additional, right, requests, and that's where the addenda can be an attachment to it, where you're maybe they're wanting to leave some personal things behind, right? So maybe it's a washer and dryer and a fridge that's not in the MLS, and you want to include those things. That's where you're going to spell out the additional requests.
So we write them with the buyer. Did I understand correctly? For example,
Yeah, the first thing that I would do is lean on your mentor or the PC coach or Simon in those situations to help you draft the language for that situation. So those would be examples. Like, I'll give you another example would be They want to close on the property, March 30th. But the seller wants 10 days after close of escrow for occupancy. So that would be another example of you're kind of spelling that out in that situation in the additional terms or the addendum. That makes sense?
Yes, thank you.
But if you had spoken to the listing agent beforehand, then you would have known they want that. Would you add that in the offer? Or would you wait for the listing agent to,
I don't know all these buttons, man.
there you go,
There we go. I would,
you would already include it,
well, especially if I've already had the conversation with the listing agent.
and they
about
told
those
you like they
things.
need
Yeah.
10 days after.
Yeah, and those are good, like, those are, real estate is so situational, like, there's just no real
Yeah.
black and white to every transaction, which is why. Gathering information is the most critical, right? Especially if the listing agent's willing to give you some information. Because that information might be really important. So I'll give you another example. It's built into the contract now, but it used to not be, and that's solar panels. So solar panels would be another example of where we would have a special clause or an addenda that we're writing additional information on, because we know the house has, solar panels, but the listing agent doesn't have it included anywhere, right? So we're wanting to clarify all of that.
Got you.
Yeah, like if it's a house that, they have stuff everywhere, right? I'm not like, not necessarily hoarding, but they have stuff.
Yeah.
You know, what, maybe you're sweetening the pot by saying to the seller, I'll do the trash out. And you're gonna be putting that's a special clause or an addenda. You're enhancing the contract with additional information. Right? It's not standard in the contract. So that's what that means. So back to, you're having the conversation, you're using the contract as your guide with the buyer to help fill it out. You want to make sure that you're clarifying and reviewing anything, and because we're in a digital world, it's, hey, I'm sending you over via an email, I'm sending you over the purchase contract, everything we talked about before you initial and sign it, I want you to read it and make sure it makes sense based on our conversation. I want to make sure that you understand it. You also have a function as an agent, whether you're working with a buyer or a seller, to use a service called Glide. And I believe that's part of either CAR or part of Zip Forms, one of the two, where you can actually send it over, the contract over ahead of time and say, I want you to know, this is the purchase contract you're going to be filling out and signing when we find the property of your dreams. So you don't have to read it all tonight, but I want you to just maybe start getting your head wrapped around what that contract looks like. It's a great little value add that you can have for your clients. You can do it with the sellers. You can send over the listing agreement in advance and say, hey, I want you to start reviewing this before I ask you to sign it. And what's cool about Glide, the reason I'm saying use Glide is because you can literally prove that they opened it up and read it.
Mhm.
If you just send them an email and an attachment, it's easy for them to go, oh yeah, I got it, it looks good, right? So just, something that's important. It'll also, don't feel too bad if you miss something, because there's nothing wrong with you learning and the buyer learning together. Oh, I didn't even think about asking you that. Oh, I didn't even notice that. Like, sometimes it's okay. But the idea here is that they understand what it is that they're signing. Know what's essential in your area. I just gave you that example of a city report. That's an example. If I were to tell you what are the average property taxes in LA County, they're 1.2. Well, if you go into Compton, guess what they are? 1.6. So that's an example of know what's essential in your area. Property taxes are different. The other thing that we have to deal with here in California is natural hazard disclosures. Believe it or not, we have areas that are susceptible to fire and floods and mudslides and earthquakes and all sorts of fun stuff. And what that could be important to the buyer. Noise, freeways, airports, all of those things, can be an influence. Know the standard common terms and offers in your area. We kind of talked a little bit about that. I don't know that you can always avoid rookie agent mistakes. It just comes with the territory because real estate's situational. You just really need to be okay leaning on your mentor, the PC coach, or your broker for things. Nothing wrong with asking some questions before you write the offer, before you submit the offer. Nothing wrong with that at all. So making sure that you got your head wrapped around it. All right, presenting the offer. Again, it's pretty simple. You're gonna have the purchase agreement, hopefully proof of funds, hopefully a pre-approval letter. Those are the most important things. You can no longer, well, I don't want to say no longer. How do I say this? This is being recorded, right? So you guys know what a law letter is?
Yeah, oh, that's also.
Okay, so back in the day, we used to be able to present a letter with our offer to the seller to tell them how cool our buyers are. And you're really not allowed to do that anymore, even though some of those things slip through the cracks. So the best way I would say is when you're talking to the listing agent, just ask them, is it okay that I send a love letter? And just see how they respond to that, because maybe it is important to the seller. So I'm the guy that I want my seller and buyer to approve everything, and as long as they're okay with it, I'm not breaking the law. There's no law that says you can or can't do things. It's just everybody needs to be transparent, right? So making sure that you have the offer, any accompanying documents that need to go with it. It's the same thing on the listing side. Following in the instructions, this is again where you lean on if the listing agent's giving you instructions, make sure you're reading those. Label all the documents clearly, order documents logically. So here's what that means to me. So you have all of this, so you represent the buyer, and after they get through docu-signing everything or zip forming everything, the final product is an attachment that's a PDF. Are you guys with me?
Mm-hmm.
And that PDF has a lot of different things in it. And if you've ever downloaded the contract, the first 3 pages aren't even the contract. It's not till page 4 that you actually see the first page of the contract. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So think about from a presentation perspective. If you want to stand out, that would be an example of me receiving your offer, and the first thing I see is page 1. I'm going to be like, okay, that's what I was looking for. I don't want to scroll through a bunch of stuff. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so step 1 is making sure that your documents are clear, and here's what else you want to do. So you got the contract and all the pages in the PDF, and you got a pre-approval letter and a proof of funds, and they're all PDFs. If you send that to me in one attachment, you're going to annoy the heck out of me. So you're already like getting on my bad side, and I'm just telling you this, you know, and have a little fun. No judgment. The point is, the easier you make it for the listing agent, the more they're going to like you. That's what we're talking about, presenting things, right? So the pre-approval letter, the proof of funds, the contract, all of those things are not only separate attachments that I can just click through and look at conveniently. I also want the body of the email, number 5, I want you to summarize it.
Mm-hmm.
Most agents go, hey, Brandon, here's my offer, let me know what you think. I would rather you say, hey, Brandon, my buyer is very interested in the property. All of the purchase agreement and all the accompanying documents are attached, but here's a summary. Purchase price is X, closing date is X, inspection period is X. Just give me the highlights so that I'm not going through the PDFs trying to figure out what it is that you're sending me. That's what that means.
And we can use ChatGPT for it. I mean, we just upload the file, make the summary, right? And
You absolutely can. Yep, absolutely. Not a problem.
But so for that summary, I mean, yeah, like offer price, closing date, inspection dates, anything like else you would feel as a listing agent?
That's all dependent on the information that you gather.
Okay, yeah.
So if I'm the listing agent, David, and I said, hey, it's important to the seller that they close on April 15th, as an example. If you wrote the offer in 30 days, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
But if it said close on April 15th, I'd think you were a rock star. And then you would put that as, you mentioned what was important to the seller was closing on April 15th. I want you to know that's one of the bullet points in your email summary. So you want to highlight things that you found out are important to the seller. like they need 10 days after close, right? All those
You
things.
can put that
Put that in your summary, man, and that, it just makes you stand out.
But from the, I guess, generic one, price, closing date, inspection date.
Yes, inspection, appraisal, loan, like those are just the most important, most common things. Yep, absolutely. Number 6 is notifying the listing agent. You just can't rely on sending it over in an email. You have to go the extra effort. Text them. I just want you to know I sent an offer over an email, kindly confirm receipt, right? You want them participating in it. And then once you get to that place, this is a step that I see a lot of buyer's agents not do here at KW. And that's put all of the documents in command in your opportunities folder. If you start doing that, what's cool is when you log into command or when the office is looking at your profile in command, they see your pipeline. It's kind of cool to see that you have things in your pipeline, right? So that's an important part. And then obviously number 8 is keeping your buyer in the loop on what's happening.
Hey, I submitted the
I
offer.
want you to know I submitted everything. I'll keep you posted. It's 8:30 at night. We might not get an answer till tomorrow, so try and sleep tonight. Don't expect anything, right? Just set the expectation with the communication. Make sure they understand what happens next. And for whatever reason, the seller accepts it, the listing agent's gonna open escrow and they're gonna immediately wanna know where your deposit is. So are you ready to get the wire instructions, right? And have some fun with it and be excited about it, because it's a really cool thing for buyers and sellers, right? So that's my kind of my checklist there. From that point. Any questions, comments on that before we move on?
So the live option on the MLS or wherever it's at there. It would be able to send them just a blank contract.
Yeah.
And then we can send it like right away,
Yeah.
pretty much.
So David, I'm super excited that you're wanting to buy a property, and I know you still got to talk to the lender. In the meantime, I want you to get familiar with our contract.
Because we're gonna be using
Yeah,
that.
it's a great value add. If you think about it from that perspective, David. If I sent that to you and I knew that you opened it and read it, you and I are probably gonna have some good conversations, right?
Some questions, some.
If you can't even open it up and read it, what is that telling me about you?
I mean, are you really?
Maybe you're serious, you're not so serious, right? Maybe you're not organized, or you know what I mean? It doesn't, some people are right brain more than left brain, and whatever. What it's doing is it's allowing you to size up your situation, right? And that's one reason why I recommend doing it, yeah. Okay, receive and review the offer checklist. So this is now, I'm the listing agent. So I'm the listing agent, I'm getting the offer. So this is what maybe you sent me an email and it's got a great summary. The summary says, hey, my buyers are really excited. Here's a quick summary. Purchase offer is $1 million, right? So your email says $1 million and I open it up and it says 975, right? So we want to make sure everything's complete. What does this really mean? The most important thing is that the most important fields are filled in accordingly, and that each page is initialed and signed where it needs to be. Especially, and I don't know the page off the top of my head, so I apologize. The page where there's arbitration and mediation. It's the only page of the contract where 3 initials need to happen on the same page. So you need to make sure, right, that everybody is agreeing to arbitration and mediation. If not, if your buyer or doesn't want to initial that, or your seller, that's a phone call to Simon to say, hey, I want you to know I have a situation, the buyer doesn't want to sign arbitration. When could that happen? If you ever do business with an attorney, attorneys know everything, they don't need you, and they're not gonna sign that clause for whatever reason. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation, but that's usually the only type of buyer who doesn't want to do that. So making sure it's complete, please acknowledge receipt. So if I sent you the offer, I reply and say, thanks, I really appreciate it. I'll get back to you. Here's the next steps. Like, be collaborative and be communicative. Get the offer to the seller in a timely manner. And again, this is subject to you having the conversation with the seller, which with which is the best approach for the seller. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're listing a property for $799,000, my guess in this area is that you're probably gonna get multiple offers. So the conversation with the seller is, hey, I really appreciate you pricing it the way you priced it. We're probably gonna get multiple offers. How would you like to receive and review those offers? Some sellers want to see them as they come in. Some sellers are okay with, well, it's Tuesday. Can we go ahead and just let everybody know we're gonna review offers on Sunday by 5? Yes, great. Just have it spelled out, however that's happening. But I want you to know that you have an obligation that within 24 hours of receipt of any offer, you need to be presenting it to the seller. Unless you have their written permission that they don't want that.
And that can be just like in a text or email or something.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea is that we don't want to open the door for somebody getting mad at us, right? We just want them to be on the same page. Creating an executive summary. So believe it or not, let's just say on that $799 listing, you ended up with 12 offers. What you might not want to do, and this is okay too, is you might want to send the offers to the seller or wait. But with an executive summary, what that's allowing you to do is create this roadmap of the highlights of all 12 of those offers. And you can do that actually in Command, believe it or not. We call it an offer summary, and we've done this tons of times with our sellers, and it's just giving them a snapshot. Who's the buyer? What's the offer amount? What are the terms? Any special notes? And then the seller can look at that one summary right across the board. And then it just helps the conversation with the seller about, I don't like that one, I don't like that one, I don't like that one. Maybe we're gonna do a multiple counter to all of them. Maybe we're gonna take the top 3. Maybe we're just gonna pick the right one. But it's entirely up to the seller, but that it's a lot easier to look at the summary or the executive summary than it is to go through 12 different contracts. Oh, wait, I forgot, what did that one say? Like, then it's all right there on one page. That's the creative executive summary.
So let's say you have a seller who, like, I want them in real time as you get them. But you like, whatever, call them, whatever they tell you to do, right? Hey, here's another offer, and then like at the end of the day or something, would you do that executive summary?
Yeah, because, well, if the seller says, you know, send them to me as they come in, but I still want to wait and review all the offers on Sunday. Send the offers, you can have the conversations, and I would still do the executive summary unless for whatever reason, one comes in that they just love and they want to move forward on.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we're just wanting to communicate, and that's where number 5 comes in. Whatever you and the seller agree to do, just make sure that you're articulating that back to all the buyers and all the buyers' agents. So that it's a level playing field. It's really tough in a competitive market for people to feel like, you know, you're not submitting their offer or you're not listening to them. So the best way to effectively make sure is to avoid not answering the buyer. Just got to be honest with it. Yes, I received your offer, but I'm not presenting it till Sunday. You know, whatever the scenario is, just make sure that you're communicating and you're communicating truthfully. As a listing agent, this is something that a lot of classes don't teach, but it's there on number 6. And that is, David, I got your offer. I really appreciate that. I noticed that your buyer's putting 5% down. They're getting a conventional loan with Bank of America. I just want you to know tomorrow, I'm going to be calling the lender. So as a listing agent, a standard of practice for us is to talk to the lender of the buyer to make sure we're all on the same page, right? I want to know that the lender is communicative. They pick up their phone, they return messages. I want to know that the lender has actually qualified the borrower. I want to know how far along are they in the process? Like, are you still waiting for a verification of employment? Because that's a big step that we could be missing, right? I want to know where they are. And more importantly, as a listing agent, I'm going to ask the lender things like, what happens if they don't get this house? I want to know what information is the lender willing to say? Well, they wrote offers on 3 other properties. Would that be important to know? right? I want to gather some information from the lender. I want to know if we go into contract tomorrow, how quickly can you order the appraisal? Like, these are the things I want to know from the lender. So I'm calling the lender to also qualify the lender and the borrower so that I'm going back to the seller with the right information about this buyer. Here's what it boils down to, you guys. If I'm a listing agent, I don't want to go under contract with any buyer who can't perform or doesn't have their act together. It's as simple as that. Come back in 3 weeks. If I still don't have a deal, and I'm still on the market, great, but at least you have your act together now. I don't want to go under contract with someone who can't perform. It's the same with the buyers. If you're representing a buyer, you probably don't want to go under contract with a buyer who can't perform either, right? So number 6 is an important step if you're a listing agent. And then number 7, create an outline document to reference when you call the sellers. That's pretty much glorified note taking, and just making sure you're in communication with your sellers. So the process is really important, but it all revolves around the contract and the terms and the accompanying documentation. And the cleaner you have it, and the more those documents are readily available, the more professional you look, the more we know you have your act together, and it's going to be easier to make decisions on whether we want to go under contract with you or not. That's really, in its simplest form, what we're wanting to do. So if you're constantly scrambling to get information, it's telling me you don't have your act together, and I don't have a lot of confidence in your ability to get across the finish line. That's what it's telling me. So, and the best way to avoid that is what? Pretty much everything that we've been talking about. You got to get your act together and make sure everybody's on the same page.
For reaching out to the lender,
Yeah.
would you reach out, let's say you get those 12 offers, you would reach out to all 12 buyers, lenders? Okay,
And even if the 12 offers, 10 of them were loans and the other 2 were cash, I'm still calling the bank.
from the 2 that are cash,
Yeah, because I have a proof of funds.
even though they sent you the bank
Yeah,
statement.
because they're not gonna tell you like too much stuff, but you wanna know, hey, I just wanna know that this person is legit, this is, right, this is the information that they gave me. They wrote an offer on $1 million property, they said they have the funds available, I just need to make sure the funds are available. You don't have to give me the exact balance, I just need to know they can close.
Mhm.
Their cooperation is telling me how this transaction is gonna be.
Okay.
The more cooperative they are, the more comfortable I feel about it. The harder it is, my confidence goes away.
And financial institutions, in your experience, they've been pretty open about.
It depends on the institution.
Okay, I was
Like
gonna
the
say
big
some-
5 banks are a pain in the butt.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, some of them I feel like
No,
don't feel
but
comfortable.
if it's definitely like a line of credit, if it's, from a retirement account, it's something like that, I wanna talk to
Yeah.
that financial person. I wanna know how liquid it is.
But if it's like a savings account or something from Chase, I feel like.
Yeah, that I'm not too worried about, right? It's the date on what I got. I'll give you an example. So 2 weeks ago, so the first week of March, Tammy received an offer from an agent, all cash, but the proof of funds was from August last year.
Oh, yeah, that's.
So that's an example of, I don't have a lot of faith. It sounds like you're just writing contracts. You've been writing contracts since at least August and nothing's sticking. What's wrong with these people?
Mhm.
That's where our head goes, because you're not acting in good faith because you don't really have your act together,
Mhm.
and that's disappointing, right? So that's what that means. So this is a qualifier for you guys. For those of you who are newer and you're not quite there with the confidence to have the conversation with your buyers and sellers, when you get to that place and you're confident in asking for it, you're gonna quickly understand whether your buyer and seller actually have their act together. And that's the most important thing. So, any ahas from any of that?
It's filled with ahas, actually, to be honest.
Most of
I
them are-
wanted to ask you if how can we access these recordings later? Like, because I just checked YouTube, they're not there, so how do we access them?
The recording of these classes?
Yeah.
That's a good question I can
I
ask.
think it's in the hub.
Oh, it's in the hub. You have the link for the hub?
Yeah, let me check that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Omer, you can also reach out to Stephanie or Rojo
up at the front.
Yeah, they'll have those recordings soon.
Okay,
wanna-
thank you.
I wanna say it's like kwsouthbayhub.com or something,
Mhm.
something like that, but yeah, you can get these recordings. We talked a little bit about commands, leverage it to keep track of your pipeline. I think we have separate trainings, or Scott Leroy does a lot of training on this as well. And then just remember, it's a process. The people in the transaction are gonna be different. The situation might be different, but the process is the same. I gotta have a contract. There's fields that need to be filled in. There's paperwork that has to go with it, depending on the situation. There's gonna be some negotiations back and forth probably. And if you have great communication with the other side, that helps. And sometimes you don't, and sometimes you just have to throw darts, but either way, you should have a mentor or your PC coach or the broker is here. I know they're really good at being available to help, so that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Counter offers, again, we talked a little bit about this. I don't know if you have any questions on any of this, but that's pretty much the flow. Nothing out of the ordinary there. We're not gonna do any of this stuff. What else do you guys wanna know? I'm here for a few more minutes. Hopefully you learned a few things. So what are some of the most important things that we discussed today?
I mean,
I know,
print out that offer, I kinda wanna do that, go through it, highlight like my own.
pretend you're buying a property, just pull any property off the MLS. And go through the motions of trying to fill it out, and it's gonna help you with the questions. For your checklist, you're like, wow, I need to make sure I'm asking my buyer this question before I write the offer, right? And that's the beauty of going through the contract, is I think it helps better prepare you. And then you just need to sprinkle the other things we talked about. I need a pre-approval letter or a pre-qualification letter. I definitely need a proof of funds. And then I need to have the confidence to say to the buyer, I want you to know before we submit any offer, these are the things that I need at a minimum. This is why you're paying me. This is how I protect you. This is how I protect me. And more importantly, if we're in a multiple offer situation, I want to make sure you sign or shine, excuse me. So, and it just takes some practice, again, this is like second nature now. I've just been doing this so long, right?
If there's an issue on the title side that shouldn't be there, but is there for some error reason,
All right, so let's say you represent the buyer
that,
and you're under contract and there's a title issue. So now the challenge is your buyer, how quickly can the problem get solved? And is your buyer willing to wait? That's that.
so I'll give you a very
Yeah.
this, but I'm dealing with the homeowner, the seller.
Okay,
But as I was pulling the tax record and title, when they first bought the home, for some reason it says mobile, like a mobile home. It's not even close,
okay.
never was, like it's just in the regular neighborhood.
You sure it's the right APN number, it's the right address?
Yeah, we checked the right address, but when they bought it, they did FHA, like the bank approved it, they got funded with a loan.
Obviously.
So it's a regular loan, it's not a special mobile
Yeah.
home thing or whatever, but they didn't even realize. Like it said mobile home until now that they're thinking of selling.
So this is a property that's not on the market.
Not
You're
yet,
interested in selling it. You
Correct.
noticed that.
yes.
So who's your title rep? Who usually go to? Do you have
I mean, one of the ones we use here.
Alright, so whoever it is you pick, give them the address and
Mhm.
just say, hey. This person's thinking about selling it. It looks like a single family home, but I see a conflict. Would you let your underwriting department, let me know what they think. So most title reps aren't gonna have a problem. Give them the address and they'll come back
I'll
with,
tell you,
here's the history, here's what happened, or this is what's missing and this is what we need to get from the seller.
okay,
So, yeah, so that would be an example if I'm getting ready to list a property. That's part of my checklist of having our act together before we go to the open market, because we don't wanna.
Yeah,
we don't wanna create any
we don't
delays.
want to go
Yeah,
into
yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
so that's our.
And that's where we lean on our title reps.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. What else? What other questions you guys got? Okay,
I wanted to ask about, so like if when you started, what were the things that you wish somebody told you when filling the contracts, or just in general as a starting agent? So what are the kind of do's and don'ts for you, or some mistakes you've been through because you didn't have enough knowledge, for example?
so I think one of the first mistakes I made was I didn't realize that I had time to figure things out. I always felt when I started in real estate, everybody wanted to get this done as quickly as possible, and it always put me in this awkward position or spot that I kept missing things, and it made me feel embarrassed and I didn't know what I was doing, right? So I really am big on just own the purchase contract to start, just understand why there's all these blank fields, right? Just, that's gonna answer so many questions, Amir, because you wanna have credibility and you wanna be able to speak with authority and you wanna be able to make sure that your ducks are in a row. And then most of it just revolves around that contract. And so I didn't have to do that when I started. My broker didn't say, learn the contract. My broker said, go meet people at open houses and just put deals together and it'll all fall in place. And I didn't realize I probably lost deals because the buyer or the seller didn't think I had my act together and they moved on to somebody else. So that's a big thing for me. So if I could go back and start over again, I would just know and own every contract. As long as I know it, I'm gonna have better conversations and I'm gonna be better prepared and I'm gonna feel more like a professional.
And what are the contracts that come to the top of your mind that we should start with? Like the 2080, let's say.
Yeah, so I think, are you gonna specialize more in residential?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the contracts have got a little better in California. We used to have multiple contracts for different things, meaning we had a separate contract if it was like a short sale REO. We had separate contracts if it was like, 2 to 4 units and things like that. So I would just start with the residential purchase contract because it now encompasses a lot of cool things. But there's gonna be some sections in there that you're gonna go, wow, I don't even know what assignment means. I don't even know, like, there's seller financing. So there's enough just on the residential purchase contract to start there. And then on the seller side, it's the listing agreement, the disclosures, and the MLS addendum. Those are the core of what you need to know and understand. Just those right there. And then on the lending side, my recommendation is that you work with lenders who do what's called direct underwriting approval. That's my biggest thing with the lender.
Can you elaborate, on this, please? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
So a lot of lenders use the term pre-qualified or pre-approved very loosely. And what that typically means is that they've had a conversation, maybe they ran credit, maybe they got a verification of employment, that kind of stuff. But they haven't fully underwritten that. So direct underwriting for us means that lender took the borrower through the whole underwriting process. They have approval, and the only 2 things they're missing is a house and an appraisal. They can close in 21 days. And the reason that's important for us is we know they've been fully underwritten. They're super motivated because they got the lender all the paperwork. And the only thing they're missing is a house and an appraisal. That to us is like gold. We know you're motivated as a buyer. We know the lender has their act together. They've completely underwritten it. Because what happens is a lender that tells you they're pre-approved or pre-qualified, they're not telling you always the full story. Maybe they didn't get verification of employment. Maybe they didn't get verification of income. Maybe they're missing some things. And then what ends up happening is you go under contract with a pre-approved borrower that's really not vetted completely. And then they need more time, or there's a delay, or they don't qualify, and that just sucks. So that's a standard for us with our lenders. So in addition to learning the contracts, I would find the right lenders who understand direct underwriting and its power and partner with those lenders because they're gonna help you have a cleaner transaction, and it's a lot better to write an offer that can close in 21 days than 45. Yeah, good questions.
One more, like, how do you know if they're doing this? Like, let's say the buyer wants to work with a specific lender. Do you just simply ask them, or like, how do you know if they're good or bad?
Yeah, so I would just start with, do you do direct underwriting approvals? Yes or no? And how you know they're doing it is because the way they talk about the borrower is exactly what I was describing. They're good to go, they just need a house, like. The pre-approval letter is completely different, Amir. It literally says they've been completely underwritten, so that approval letter is even more different. Or a lot different than a standard pre-approval or pre-qualification letter. Most pre-approval and pre-qualification letters are just on the letterhead of the lender. Where the direct underwriting is like a legit underwritten document, which is pretty powerful.
Oh, thank you for clarifying this. I didn't know there are like now 3 documents we should kind of be aware of, like the
Yeah.
pre-qualification, standard pre-approval, and now we're talking about underwritten, fully underwritten.
As much as I want to believe and trust everyone, I've learned not to. So I'll like, this is our first date, right? And what do you do on your first date? You talk about your good qualities, they talk about their good qualities. Like, I could care less about the first date. I wanna know about the 5th date. I wanna know that you've done your job, and sometimes in the lender world, they do just enough to make us happy, and that to me is still not good enough. So, yeah.
You said, pre-approval letters are gonna look different, correct?
Well,
Like from somebody who does.
the direct underwriting approval letter looks completely different. And it'll literally say they've been completely underwritten. That means.
That would say it, okay.
And that means that the borrower did everything the lender asked. Because you gotta realize all of the mortgage brokers and the loan officers that you meet, they're not underwriting it.
Yeah, they're just,
taking in the application, and they're the guide that's, putting it all together. So you want to know an underwriter has actually reviewed the file. The other thing to that point, while I'm thinking about it, is what's changed today is the lender will take their information and they'll put it into the Fannie Mae system. And the Fannie Mae system says, based on the information you've given me, they're approved for this. And so that's what the lender will do. They typed in a what if scenario, and the computer spit out, well, as long as all these things are true, here's your pre-qualification letter. And I want you to realize that they're still missing documentation. I can lie about anything on an application. So what I want to know is that it's been validated. That's what I really want. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
awesome.
good stuff. All right. Okay, well, thank you guys for your time. I hope you learned a few things. I think I have a class on Monday too. I don't know what I'm teaching.
Awesome.
Mondays Ignite, I'm teaching Mondays Ignite as well, so hopefully.
Would you mind on Monday, not for ourselves, but just to see, like, if you had like a copy of a pre-approval that's the generic one, and one that's like that direct, just so we can see the language, because somebody who's never seen any.
I could ask one of my lenders to send me what that looks like.
Yeah, you can just, Bob hole, but it doesn't matter to me.
No, I'll just black it out, whoever it is, whatever.
Just so we can see the differences, yeah,
for sure.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, everybody enjoy the rest of your day.
I think there was a chat.
Is there a chat in here?
It was very fruitful, by the way.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Austin, appreciate that. Yeah, Amir, anything? Yeah, good, I'm glad you got a few nuggets out of this.
Yeah, a lot.
So, All right, everybody enjoy the rest of your day and we'll see you on the next one.